Welcome to the Buzzed Feed, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Embellish podcast. Once a week, or every 2 weeks, or every 3 weeks, or whenever I decide it's time, I'm going to compile a list of news stories that I think that you might be interested in hearing about, specifically within the whiskey industry. If you don't think these articles are important, then you can absolutely feel free to shuffle on over to another channel, because that's what I'm going to do here. We'll probably drink today. It's going to be just coffee, because that's the kind of week it's been, and it's still early in the morning. So maybe the lucidity of this will actually increase, as opposed to normally if I record drinking whiskey, they may decrease. There's no sponsor to this show. All the Buzzed Feed news that's fit to editorialize for February the 13th. The first article I want to talk about is from Uprocks. Beam Distilling's Freddie No talks about opening a craft distillery inside a Monster Legacy brand. If you've poked around for very long, there's this a movement within Jim Beam to bring forward a craft distillery and calling it James B. Beam Distilling, if I remember correctly. Not entirely sure off the top of my head. James B. Beam Distillery. That is correct. If I actually read through the article that I've copied down here, you'll see it. The idea is that several of the things that they do are more crafty than anything else. And if you look at the traditional version of craft generally is going to refer to a small producer, then absolutely this is a ridiculous story. This is a ridiculous thing to say. I had an opportunity to talk to Alan Bishop last week, and we specifically talked about craft whiskey and what that means. And I think he may or may not agree in this specific situation that craft distilling is exactly what's happening there, or crafting whiskey. There's some degree of art form where they're taking a smaller quantity of whiskey, blending it together in an artful way to create a unique expression. And so when you look at Little Book, when you look at Booker's, when you look at any of the one-off things that Beam happens to be doing that may fit this James B. Beam distillery, that may be closer. You know, the craft is also becoming synonymous with distilleries that have restaurants or bars or a cocktail program or some other thing going on, and that's exactly what's happened at James B. Beam Distilling. Only thing I would say to this is that, come on, James Beam. Come on, Jim Beam. Let everybody else have something. I mean, you guys are probably one of the most reputable and recognizable brands that are out there. There's no need for this. Second one I've got. This is a Buffalo Trace press release, and so I don't have any problem reading this one almost to its entirety. But the Buffalo Trace Distillery is welcoming 2022 by donating 2022 bottles, including its first NFT with a unique OFC vintage 6-liter bottle. So what came out of Buffalo Trace is that there are a ton of charitable organizations across the globe that are doing great things. And they have these bottles that they would like to do something with and to help out. And so they've created an opportunity to hand out a ton, and if you go look at their website, you can see a ton of really top shelf, nice bottles to a charitable organization. I'm looking at you, Bourbon Charity. I hope you guys are put in on this, and I'm quite sure you probably have. But they're looking for anybody who is I would assume a 501c3 organization to register for a chance to be able to win some or all of these to be able to auction off for charitable causes. The end of the day, this makes me want to start up a charitable organization to auction this off, because these are some really nice looking bottles. It may seem like an attempt to grab headlines, but they haven't been pushing this narrative pretty heavily. They haven't been asking people to say, hey, look at what we're doing over here at Buffalo Trace Distillery. We're amazing. We do all kinds of unique charitable things. Kudos to you, Buffalo Trace. Tons of people seem to like to bag on you a little bit for being Buffalo Trace and for having all of the tater bottles. This is exactly what you want to see out of a major brand. If you don't subscribe to this, there's an opportunity. You can go out to thelanereport.com and you can sign up for a email list called The Bourbon Flight, and it'll keep you up to date on these news. You can read through them. You can get your own ideas. I don't take all of these from Lane, but there are a ton of good pieces of information that come through from there. Go read that. If I happen to feature one of their articles on one of these episodes, maybe you can come over here and leave me a comment on what you think. The next article we have is from breakingbourbon.com. It is Buffalo Trace confirms measures to combat counterfeiting. As soon as the existence of the secondary market began and prices started to skyrocket, you obviously are going to see an opportunity for counterfeit bottles to be created. I remember a dozen years ago or more maybe, There was an online group where wine bottles were being traded and sold and whatnot, and there was a person who was incredibly talented at forging information and forging labels and making them look aged, and they made tons and tons of money by selling counterfeited wine bottles. So it was only a matter of time before this happens within the whiskey industry, as the secondary market inflates the bottles on some of these things like the BTAC collection. The value of them reach a point where it attracts counterfeiters. It attracts people who are wanting to be able to turn a profit. And is it something as simple as buying an old bottle, refilling it, resealing it? Or is it something slightly more nefarious where you're trying to spoof or imitate a bottle that has been released? Both of those things are going to occur. But Buffalo Trace is taking a step where they are trying to put in what is called near field communication technology. And so this is an ability to have a sort of tracking chip in the cap of some of the BTAC collection, and I would assume eventually to follow through into Pappy's. And this story hit quite a while back, maybe a month or two back, and apparently Buffalo Trace had already been doing this. People had bottles in hand that had these things in it, and so you can potentially see where that bottle went and where it should end up. And that can be useful. There's a degree of tracking here. The secondary market's not going anywhere anytime soon, but this is an opportunity to try to knock back on at least the counterfeit portion. As a brand, you want to protect the notoriety of whatever you have, and if someone is putting counterfeit juice in there, and I hate that term, but if they're putting counterfeit distillate that has been aged in those bottles, and then somebody eventually does open that bottle and try it, then you're the one that ends up looking bad because, this highly sought after multi-$1,000 bottle is now really not that great. I've often mused that if I were to own a liquor store, one of the things that I would do is if somebody wanted to purchase an allocated bottle, I would force them to rip the plastic off before they walk out to make sure that they're going to drink it. But, that's really easy to combat. That's a thing that a person with a heat shrink gun and some plastic can reseal that bottle. If I ever send or hand samples to any friend of mine, I usually put them in a Boston Round, and then I seal that so that way that twist top doesn't back off of it. And I have a heat gun that I borrowed from my mom. I think she spent $40 on it on Amazon, and the heat shrink bands are 8 cents a piece or something. So it's not hard to defeat those types of measures. In that same vein, there's a New York Times story called "That $1,000 bourbon you bought may be a phony." This article, it's basically just a story telling you that there's a chance that if you're buying high-end bottles, there's an opportunity for someone to try to counterfeit that. The last time I was in Louisville, I had an opportunity to stop in Evergreen, which is a liquor store / tasting bar. While I was in there, I was talking to one of the guys that works, and he was working with someone to help try to discover was a vintage bottle a phony or not, and trying to take clues from the way the label was printed, the type of paper that was used. And that's the problem, whenever you get into some of these vintage bottles, is that there's a lot of ways to try to counterfeit that stuff, and it takes someone with an educated eye to be able to find whether it's legitimate or not. And so purchasing vintage or high-end bottles, secondary market's probably not the place to be doing that. You need to find somewhere that is more reputable to be able to pick those up because you have a higher chance of getting the right thing from it. This is a really good article. It's an opportunity for you to kind of learn more about it and maybe be a cautionary tale to keep you from spending thousands of dollars on something that may actually be phony. Green River Distillery in Owensboro, Kentucky launched a straight bourbon whiskey this week. And, it's a distillery that's been around for quite some time. They've made a number of things that you've probably had. They make a ton of different things, but it was a great opportunity for them to restake their name. You probably knew them previously as the O.Z. Tyler Distillery. They made things. I've got a few bottles from them from that era. This particular bottle that they launched, go out there and search it out because it's a beautiful looking bottle. Got a lot of design to it. And it is a moderately inexpensive bottle. So this is new news that came out this week. Go give it a shot. If you don't follow Bourbon Lens on podcasting, you absolutely should. You should also Patreon them because being a Patreon of them, you can get an opportunity to be a part of some virtual tastings with some distillers. In the last month, I've had an opportunity to have a tasting with both Few Spirits and with Widow Jane. And if you've been following the news, both Few and Widow Jane were under the same parent company that got picked up by Heaven Hill Brands. Both of them are doing some fantastic things, and every indication from Lisa is that nothing is going to change with Widow Jane specifically, other than they now have access to more things. So this is a great story. You can find it just about anywhere. Go out there, read about it, pick up the brands, do whatever you can. Probably the last story we're going to talk about this week is going to be a headline of "The Sale of Private Selection Bourbon Barrels Violates State Regulations." It is by Whiskey Cast. Effectively, this story is talking about how the way distilleries do single barrel selections, whenever you come in to do a single barrel selection with them, they're lumping you in with distillery visitors. When you come in as a distillery visitor, you have an opportunity to taste a certain quantity of alcohol from them. But likely what they're doing with single barrel selections, no, not likely, what they're doing with single barrel selections does not meet the ABC requirements that have been set forth. What this likely is this is the legislature of Kentucky lagging behind market trends, because if we go back 15 years, there weren't nearly as many, maybe 20, there weren't nearly as many people doing single barrel selections. And so this was not really of significant concern. But now everyone is trying to get at a single barrel selection. Liquor stores, any type of influencer, any type of YouTube channel, everybody wants an opportunity to have their own bottle, put their name on it. And so there's a huge industry around it. The upside is that the Kentucky ABC is not doing anything actively to try to prevent or stop that right now. But they are trying to encourage the Kentucky legislation to resolve this, so that way there is some degree of rules and regulations and laws around what happens here. The thing for me that is concerning about this is that anytime you involve state or federal government, it rarely gets better. It's rarely a better solution than what happens to be. And I really hope that distilling advocates are pushing hard to get this right. The access to more limited allocation bottles is less and less and less. So us as whiskey snobs, as whiskey connoisseurs, we can seek out these single barrels. And so whether it's a channel or a person that we like, or it is a particular liquor store that we have an affinity for, they have an opportunity to pick up unique expressions of key brands. This has got to get taken care of right. Now, there's a lot of chicken littling around this one too. I've seen other people talking about it and be like, oh no. Reality is, I don't think Kentucky is dumb enough to hurt themselves too bad on this. I don't suspect that they'll resolve it in this legislative session. I have no confidence in that, but I don't see them putting a halt to it either. Thanks for joining me for this particular episode of the Buzzed Feed News. I hope you found any of this entertaining, informative, whatever. If you didn't, so be it. You can hop over and watch any other videos. I'm not going to post anything extra here. I'm not going to post a summary of it. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this.